Well, good evening to all of you. And on this somewhat chilly night, we're glad to see so many of you here for this important and exciting learning opportunity. I'm Dorothy Harrell. I'm the Chancellor of the University of Colorado, Denver. And this is our 5th distinguished lecture, the Chancellor's Distinguished Lecture, that is made possible through the generosity of Bob and Lenny Damrauer. And Bob and Lenny, will you please stand and just so people can express their gratitude. Thank you. I should tell you that Bob stepped into my office this afternoon and said, Dorothy, don't make a big deal of us tonight. But I do just have to say that, you know, their commitment to this university is extraordinary. And they believe so much in the value of presenting learning opportunities, not only for our students and faculty and staff, but also for the larger community. And both have worn a number of hats here at the university, and we are so, so grateful that they are part of our community. So thank you very, very much. As I said, this is the 5th in the series of Chancellor's Distinguished Lectures, and our next one will be in April, the middle of April, April 17th, when we will welcome a Nobel laureate by the name of Kip Thorne from Caltech, who will be here. So mark your calendars for that, and you'll hear more information about that when the date gets closer. So tonight, we are so honored to have Mike Phillips as our special lecturer. He has served as director of the Turner Endangered Species Fund and an advisor to Turner Biodiversity Division since he established both of those with Ted Turner and his family in 1997. Programs regarding wolf eradication began in the United States as early as the 1600s because of the inherent conflict that existed between the animals' existence and the agricultural interests at that time. And those efforts continued until well into the 20th century, until both the gray and the red wolves were nearly exterminated. Mike led historic efforts to restore red wolves to the southeastern United States and the gray wolf to Yellowstone National Park and surrounding national forests that collectively comprise the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. Mike is also a member of the Montana State Legislature, where he founded the Montana Legislative Climate Change Caucus. In addition to representing House and Senate districts in 2009, Mike was recruited by the White House to join a coalition of state legislative leaders to work with the Obama administration and the U.S. Senate in an effort to pass clean energy jobs and climate change legislation. Tonight, Mike will share with us the history and future of wolf recovery with an emphasis on Western Colorado, which has become a key part of that initiative. I know that there are lots of variety of opinions, and that's part of what it means to be in a vibrant and vital education environment. And so we look forward to the presentation and to the opportunity for a Q&A session afterwards. And what I would just ask of all of us, as we do in this kind of an environment, is to be respectful of the variety of opinions and perspectives that exist on this and lots of other issues as well. So with that, will you please join me in welcoming Mike Phillips?
Well, thank you for sharing some of your time with me this evening. I'm a big believer that time is one of our greatest gifts, and it is awfully humbling that you would be willing to share some of your good time with me. Thank you, Chancellor. Bob and Dorothy, thank you. I felt nothing but at home. The outside weather seems to be a Bozeman summer day, so I'm right where I need to be. It is truly a great pleasure. I'm here in large part because I believe that a serious, comprehensive conversation about restoring gray wolves to western Colorado is long overdue. Now, you might ask, well, why is that? There's at least several reasons. We'll dive into some this evening, but first let me point out that there is widespread, durable, overwhelming support for the wolf's return. There is a pattern of land ownership in the western half of your great state that is ideally suited for the gray wolf. 17+ million acres of federal public lands really matter to large carnivores. There's a legal reason for driving this issue to a conclusion. There's very favorable prey populations in western Colorado that make clear that a viable population of gray wolves could easily grace the western half of this state. And there are folks out there that believe that a conversation is long overdue because there is continental significance to this effort. If gray wolves could be restored to the Southern Rockies ecoregion, which is principally western Colorado that you can see outlined in that polygon, it would serve as the archstone connecting gray wolves from the high Arctic to the Mexican border. There is no other place in the world where you can imagine the restoration of a much maligned, much misunderstood, endangered large carnivore over a continental landscape. That is ecological restoration of the finest kind. That's another reason why this conversation is long overdue. And then finally, there are a raft of people, myself included, that believe that this issue fits the sensibilities of Coloradans very well. We tried to capture that in a little video, if I can get this machine to work. These are not long videos, but they're worth watching.
There's a chorus we sing here in this place, Colorado. It rings from the Maroon Bells to Mile High, from the great sand dunes to the highest town in America, in the birthplace of rodeo and the cheeseburger, where snowmelt flows into every glass. We hear it floating on the breeze above Red Rocks or drifting way out into the backcountry where the wild things roam. And the air hums with life. It's our anthem to freedom. But listen carefully. One voice has gone missing. A note that rang through our mountains for eons has disappeared. Help us return this voice to Colorado.
Well, if you believe that there's a need for this conversation, you may fairly then ask, why am I involved? Why would you guys spend your evening with some guy from Montana? Well, I have had the good fortune to be involved in wolf recovery and conservation for going on 40 years now. I caught my first gray wolf. That's the upper left-hand corner photograph. I caught my first gray wolf for research purposes in the Superior National Forest of northeastern Minnesota in the summer of 1980. I was honored to lead the red wolf restoration effort. That's the little red wolf in that middle slide. That's me with the hat on and one of my teammates. That little wolf is known as 344. She's wearing that blue muzzle so she doesn't bite us. Little red wolves can be physically restrained. She was the first red wolf born in the wild in many, many decades. That was, you may not know, but you should, it was the first effort by humanity to restore a carnivore species that had been declared extinct in the wild. And I was honored as well to lead the effort to restore gray wolves to Yellowstone National Park. That big black wolf is known as number 6. That's me in the front, Doug Smith in the back. Those big gray wolves with those big heads were too big to physically restrain. You couldn't get a good enough purchase to hang on, so we would typically use chemical restraint. That's why we're carrying. That wolf is drugged. The wolf is drugged. I've served on every Mexican wolf recovery team that's been convened since 1995. I have overseen a Mexican wolf captive breeding and pre-release facility at the Ladder Ranch in southwestern New Mexico for nearly 25 years. I have been honored to serve in the Montana State Legislature for 14 years, both as a member of the House and a member of the Senate, I have seen this issue up close and personal from not only a scientific perspective, but also a policy and regulatory perspective. There are many things I don't know anything about. I know a little bit about gray wolf recovery. You may not know, but historically the gray wolf is one of the most widely distributed large mammals in North America. You could find them everywhere, from coast to coast, east to west, and north to south. You could find them in the forests and the grasslands, in the deserts and in the swamps, until we launched a 250, almost 300-year war to drive the wolf to extinction. It was nearly successful. By the late 1950s, gray wolves could only be found in the far northeastern corner of northeastern Minnesota and a small island in Lake Superior. We used the most devilish means to kill gray wolves. We shot them, we poisoned them, we dragged puppies from dens and clubbed them to death. We cut off heads. We took one of the most widely distributed large mammals in North America and drove it to the brink of extinction. That was the case until the Endangered Species Act was passed in 1973, which buoyed recovery. That law and a host of hard-working people gave rise to the vision of restoring gray wolves to some of our country's wildlands, including Yellowstone National Park, by releasing young animals like this little female who's in her shipping crate, releasing them in Yellowstone National Park. That work was first imagined by Aldo Leopold in the 1940s. It became a reality in 1995 when we released 14 wolves that had been translocated from Canada. The project went really well. Gray wolves took to the park exceedingly well. They settled in quite nicely. I could make the case that the restoration effort was probably complete after the first 14 animals were released in 1995, but we had a second release, an insurance policy, if you will, of an additional 17 animals in 1996. Now, this was followed up with a companion effort in Idaho, slightly different means, but the end was exactly the same. And through reintroductions, you now have a robust population of gray wolves in the northern Rocky Mountains. The Yellowstone Project made clear that we could do a better job accommodating wild and self-willed nature across more than just the park. Don't let anybody tell you that, oh, well, gee whiz, Mike, you're storing gray wolves to Yellowstone Park, but that's an odd setting. Well, it is true that Yellowstone's an odd setting, but the aim of the reintroductions was never to restore gray wolves to the park. The aim was to use the highly secure, highly suitable habitat of the park to restore gray wolves to the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, which is about 15 million acres strong and mostly defined by U.S. Forest Service lands. Indeed, much like western Colorado. All you had to do to make the work in the northern Rocky Mountains hum right along was choose. You just had to choose. Western Colorado is a great place for making that choice again. And we're going to discuss the details that make western Colorado so very suitable for this initiative. Given that suitability, a few years ago, a group of people came together and gave rise to the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project. It is an effort, a coalition of conservation organizations and conservation visionaries that believe that if Coloradans were willing to embrace an honest portrayal of the gray wolf, they would conclude that coexisting with the species is a rather straightforward affair that requires only a modicum of accommodation. I am honored to stand today with you folks here tonight as a member of the science advisory team for the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project. One of your faculty, Diana Tomback, is also on that science team, as are a number of other very well-trained and deeply experienced scientists from the state of Colorado. Well, if the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project's belief that an honest portrayal, if embraced, would advance restoration, if that's true, why then does restoration struggle so? Well, restoration struggles so because of the mythical wolf. The real wolf is hard to see through the confusing haze created by the mythical wolf. The myth would have you believe that gray wolves possess a nearly supernatural ability to exercise their predatory will on a whim. The myth would have you believe that gray wolves represent a threat to human safety, a threat to the livestock industry, a threat to the big game hunting industry. Unfortunately, the myth is as wrong as it is strong. For the real wolf, oh my heavens, life is a daily struggle. For the real wolf, starvation is a common cause of death. Puppies suffer most of all. For the real wolf, hunting is a dangerous endeavor. Life-threatening injuries are common. Most efforts to hunt end up with gray wolves coming up empty-pawed. And when I talk about wolf biology and ecology, know that I'm relying on decades of reliable research. The gray wolf is one of the most studied and well-understood large mammals in the world. We know a lot about gray wolves. We know, for example, the gray wolves are not well built for their job. Their body is not well suited for the job that's in front of them. They're not very big. A gray wolf in the northern Rocky Mountains, a gray wolf in western Colorado might on average weigh, let's say 90 pounds. Well, heavens, I can find a small deer that weighs more than 90 pounds. In other words, gray wolves are almost always trying to kill something bigger than themselves. Their body's not well built for the task. That long nose, not well shown in this picture, but you know they've got that long nose. The long nose promotes less power at the tips of the canines for clamping. Compare the long nose of a gray wolf to the short nose of a cougar. Gray wolf's jaws don't lock shut. Behind his jaws will lock shut like a vise. Gray wolf's teeth wear down and break. You know, beaver's teeth grow their entire lives. If you're a gnawing rodent having ever-growing teeth, that's a good idea. Gray wolf's legs don't help much. They're good for traveling, and there's a Russian proverb that says a gray wolf is kept fed by his feet. Oh, it means they can wander tremendous distances, which they do. But otherwise, the legs aren't much help. They're not very heavily muscled, in part because the front legs of a gray wolf aren't supinating. They can't reach around and grab. In contrast, you know why a cougar's forelimbs are so heavily muscled? They can reach around and grab. Gray wolf's foot's not much help other than for traveling. The nails are forever exposed and wear down. In contrast, a cougar has taken nails to an extreme. They're retractable. They're always ready and sharp. Bears have made claws useful by making them long and heavy. Not gray wolves. I did a study of wolf skulls in Alaska, looked at a lot of skulls, looking for evidence of blunt force trauma. How often did they get kicked in the head? Fully a quarter of the skulls I studied, over 200, broken nose, broken jaw, broken skull, for getting kicked in the head. Life is difficult for gray. If you believe in reincarnation, do not wish to come back as a gray wolf. Maybe a river otter, but not a gray wolf. So you might say, well, then, gee whiz, Mike, why were they so wildly successful? They have all these liabilities. What are their assets? Well, they have two that collectively trump their liabilities. They are doggedly determined. They get up every day and they go to work, and they are supremely social. They find great strength in numbers. One of the most social large mammals in the world. And the essence of their sociality, the essence of their existence is the family, guided by typically a breeding pair. Now, I purposefully for years now have avoided the term alpha male and alpha female. I know for sure that oversimplifies gray wolf sociality. There is not just one top dog wolf in a pack. It depends on the situation at hand as to who is the decision maker. It is equally true that for the most part, a pack, which is nothing more on average than an extended family unit, it is true that most packs have only a breeding pair. So, the myth drives people to oppose restoration. Because of that, as you might expect, we came up with a video that aims to set the myth aside. See if I can get this one to work. It's about 2.5 minutes.
Everyone loves a good story. One of our favorite characters is the big, bad wolf. But what if our fairy tales don't get it right? Think of a mother wolf. She's not interested in huffing and puffing and blowing your house down. She needs to find her own home. And if her pack comes across Little Red Riding Hood in the woods, she'd make sure that her family keeps their distance and avoids conflict. Her life is full of hardship. Less than 10% of hunts are successful. Life expectancies are low. our stories created a monster. These myths drove us to fear the wolf. By the 1950s, a population of almost 500,000 in the lower 48 was nearly exterminated. And more was lost than just the wolf. You can't pull a character without changing the whole plot. Remove wolves and herd numbers can explode. Rivers can erode. How wrong our narrative had been. In 1973, on the brink of extinction, wolves were one of the first animals to gain protection under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. We'd begun to understand the truth. Wolves don't attack, they avoid us. Cattle are many times more likely to be killed by bad weather than by wolves. The wolf is making a comeback. They're tracing the shores of the Great Lakes, climbing the northern Rockies, roaming the Southwest. But there's a missing link. The reintroduction of wolves to western Colorado would restore the natural balance. It's time for a new chapter.
I would have you believe that the country is blessed.
Everyone.
That the western half of your state is defined by millions and millions of acres of federal public land. That's a critically important component to restoration. All you have to do is choose to go forward. The habitat is suitable, and I want to spend a fair bit of time on discussing just that point of habitat suitability. We know that for gray wolves, prey are supremely important. In areas where gray wolf populations have little human offtake, where human cause mortality is low, we know that gray wolf population dynamics are defined nearly exclusively by the abundance of food. That's not too terribly difficult to appreciate. Food matters. We also know that social tolerance matters, and we know that gray wolves have the ability to get people fired up and excited in all the wrong ways. We all know that hoods allow for cowardly acts. Always have, always will. But we also know that Coloradans have a very different sense of this species. That's a young Arctic wolf pup that was taken at a festival a couple of years ago. I could show you reliable public opinion survey data dating back decades that show Coloradans are really quite excited to coexist with this species. Suitability for gray wolf is defined by three things: social tolerance, as it relates to gray wolves as a threat for human safety, gray wolves as a threat to the livestock industry, and gray wolves as a threat to big game hunting. I'm going to take each of those in turn, starting with human safety. A lot of people are convinced that gray wolves are a threat, because I know that someone's fear that's sincerely held is theirs to have, and I never try to discount it. I can tell you that the fear is misplaced. There simply are no data that show that gray wolves are a threat to human safety. Now, I understand that's hard for people to accept, in part because gray wolves can sometimes be scary-looking dudes. These animals feeding on that bison carcass in Yellowstone Park are scary-looking dudes. I get that. But, you know, for the most part, they're like this old lady from Montana. She doesn't want anything to do with you and in no way represents a threat to your safety. Alaska Department of Fish and Game took a deep dive on this issue years ago. I apologize for the heavy text slide, but the data are important. They looked at this issue from 1900 to 2000, did not document a healthy wolf killing a person, no dangerous interactions in the Great Lakes states, which support a lot of people. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, more humanized than Colorado. Lots of gray wolves, no problems. Several decades of experience of millions of visitor days logged in the Superior National Forest of Minnesota, not a problem. You can read the rest. The same pattern holds true for other wilderness areas and parks. And of course, Yellowstone, a stunning example. Yellowstone gets extensive backcountry use. Lots of gray wolves in the park now for a quarter century. No problems. There simply is no threat that gray wolves offer to human safety. On to livestock, it is true that if you restore gray wolves to western Colorado, some will kill livestock. That is true. But it's equally true that it's the atypical wolf that kills livestock. Most don't. It's a very, very unusual event. So, and when again, based on real data, I'll dig in on the northern Rocky Mountains. Don't want to spend time in the Great Lakes states. Maybe that's an orange and western Colorado's an apple, but the pattern would hold for those states too. But just the northern Rocky Mountains, a very useful analog for western Colorado. All of those circles represent known wolf pack territories. So you can see they're pretty well spread out. Pretty well spread out. Probably 2,000 gray wolves hard on the ground in northwestern Wyoming, western Montana, and the northern half of Idaho. From 1997 to 2015, I haven't updated this slide through 18, but I could. The data would be the same. The pattern would be the same. You all can read it. About 6 million head of cattle in those three states. 117 were on average killed by gray wolves. I provide the range of kills in the parenthetical data, 21 in 98 and 214 in 06, for example. But on average, 0.002% of the cattle in the northern Rocky Mountains are involved in wolf depredations. Or in other words, 99.998% aren't. The same pattern holds for sheep. Y'all can see it. 99.98% of the sheep in the northern Rocky Mountains never involved in wolf depredations. Here's an average year. I should update it. Maybe I can make 18 an average year, but the pattern's the same. You got a lot of cattle that die in the northern Rocky Mountains, nearly 200,000, from a host of problems. 117 on average killed by wolves. That represents 0.06% of those that die. In other words, 99.94% of the cattle that are going to die for reasons unrelated to gray wolves. Now, my home state of Montana, here's what the pattern looks like. Again, all those circles represent known wolf pack territories. About 2 million head of cattle in the state of Montana, about 450,000 sheep. And I actually lowballed the number of wolves. That should be about 800. So here are the patterns, the average patterns over Montana, stacked on top of what you could expect in Colorado. In Montana, average about 2 million cattle. You can expect about 50 to be killed by gray wolves. Or, in other words, 99.9975% of the cattle in Montana will never be involved in a wolf depredation. You can see the same pattern for sheep. So let's drift to your great state of Colorado, and let's just look at cattle on the western side of your state, because the eastern side of the state is no good for wolf recovery. This is just the western half of Colorado. There's about 500,000 head of cattle west of I-25. If the depredation rate in Colorado was twice that of Montana, and you have no reason to believe that it will be, but if it was twice that, you can see the numbers. 99.98% of the cattle in western Montana would never be involved in a wolf depredation, if the problem here was twice that of Montana. Now, that said, if it's your 500 cattle that they killed, you got a problem. I get that. Fortunately, we have very good tools at the ready for resolving conflicts when they arise, and very good tools at the ready for preventing conflicts from ever arising in the first place. But that's not the whole story. If I only looked at depredation data, you could fairly conclude I was misleading you, because there's more to the story. Specifically, we really have to look at undetected kills too. I know as a field biologist that field work is the art of estimating. There's a great deal that happens in the woods that we never document. 3, 4, 5 times as many kills may occur as are documented. So any responsible compensation program would adjust upward for undetected kills. Similarly, we know there is this chronic concern about weight not gained. Yeah, they didn't kill my cattle, Mike, but my cattle didn't gain the weight they should have, and I lost money. Fair enough, fair enough. We've looked at that too. Very good study done in Montana showed it's a real problem if your ranch has suffered a depredation. If your ranch has suffered a depredation, on average, your calves will not gain weight as they normally would. If you're just ranching in wolf country, the pattern doesn't hold. The key that seems to trigger this issue of weight not gained is a depredation event. A properly constructed compensation program should also adjust upward for weight not gained. We can put an astronaut on the moon and bring her back. We can take your heart out of your chest and put it back better than before. I promise you, we know enough to know how to coexist with gray wolves. So that's what I have to say about livestock. Now on to big game. These are just some numbers, many-year averages from the northern Rocky Mountains, stacked on top of a many-year average for Colorado that you might find interesting. The punchline of this data slide is, holy mackerel, there's a bunch of elk and deer in Colorado compared to Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. And there's a rich history of big game hunting with large numbers of animals killed. Got it. So here's what it looks like in the great state of Montana, and these patterns persist for Wyoming and Idaho too, but I know these data very well. This map is not as hard to understand as you might think. All of those polygons are colored in a certain way. Any polygon that is red, the state of Montana believes there are too many elk. Any polygon that's green, oh, that's a sweet spot. That's just the right number of elk. And any polygon that is cream colored, there are too few. And then that blue diagonal line that dissects the western third of Montana is really the line that defines wolf country. Everything west of that line, everything to the left of that line is wolf country for the most part. Everything to the right of the line is not. And you can see in wolf country there are a whole lot of elk management units, those polygons, that are either at or above objective as defined by the state's own biologists. Elk are so common in parts of Montana, our commission has now instituted late season hunts to reduce elk numbers. Some of these late season hunt areas take place right in the heart of wolf country. You can hunt near my home in Bozeman, Montana. You can hunt elk almost 6 months out of the year. There is not a scarcity of elk in Montana, or deer for that matter, because of gray wolves hard on the ground for the last quarter century. Here are the largely overarching numbers for the three states. You can read them for yourself, but when you go from 1995 to 2017, I don't see a reduction in numbers. I don't see a problem. It looks to me as though big game hunting and gray wolves are getting along just fine, thank you very much, in the northern Rocky Mountains. If you want to understand wolf-prey dynamics, it's not complicated. Gray wolves wake up every day and they go to work. For a gray wolf, going to work means she's got to put about 7 to 10 pounds of sustenance in her belly a day. They go many, many days with no food at all. The modus operandi for a gray wolf is feast or famine, because most of the time when they hunt, they come up empty-pawed. But on average, they've got to put 7 to 10 pounds of sustenance, mostly meat, in their belly a day. So when you start to run the numbers, say 10 pounds a day, that's 70 pounds a week, that's 280 pounds a month. That's about one adult cow elk. Okay, that's 12 a year. One wolf, 12 a year. Let's double it and add one to make the math easy. Every adult gray wolf is going to consume the equivalent of 25 adult cow elk a year. They won't just eat elk, they'll eat deer too. When you walk through the numbers, here's what you could expect in Colorado. 500 gray wolves would consume the equivalent of 25,000 adult deer and elk. About 6,200 elk and about 18,000, 19,000 deer. After your hunters have taken an average of 80,000 deer and elk, and these are data from your own state game agency from 2004 to 2015, 80,000 deer and elk killed by hunters, there remain hard on the ground about 700,000 deer and elk. Gray wolves are going to pull off that 700,000. 25,000 of the 700,000, that's about 3%. The numbers simply don't support the claim that gray wolves are going to disrupt the big game hunting industry. There are plenty of deer and elk to go around for gray wolves and the recreational big game hunter. So, not a threat to human safety, not a threat to the livestock industry, not a threat to the big game hunting industry. There's a fourth issue that defines this for the state of Colorado as well, and that's the notion that, oh, gee whiz, my gray wolves are coming on their own. Give them half a chance, they'll just show up on their own. And it's true, they can go on great walkabouts, but I don't believe that they're going to get here on their own. Gray wolves are very good at finding one another. They don't like being alone. You see that wolf in the lower right-hand corner? That lone black wolf is howling to save his life. They do not like being alone. They're very good at finding one another. Life is tough for a lone wolf. When they find each other, they stay together. They are supremely social. And when they find each other and they stay together, they become common rather quickly. Now, this histogram's not too tough to understand. Just look at that first downward pointing blue arrow, and then look to the right and you'll see an upward pointing blue arrow. That just tracks the naturally occurring population of gray wolves in northwestern Montana, animals that drifted out of Canada. And in 1990, the downward pointing blue arrow, there were about half a dozen gray wolves in northwestern Montana. Within a decade, the upward pointing blue arrow, they had grown to about 100 strong. And the entire time they were doing that, their presence was well known. You can also look at the other two components of each of those histograms. The second, the pink or red, shows the growth in Wyoming, and then the yellow shows the growth in Idaho. Those portions of each bar are a function of the reintroductions that we conducted in 1995 and 1996. As you would expect, those wolves gave rise to a population that grew quickly and obviously too. Gray wolves are not subtle. They've got big feet, so they leave tracks that are indistinguishable, or that are easily distinguished from other canines. They poop on the road regularly, and it's easy to, oh, my Lord, that's a big pile of shit. That's got to be a wolf turd. They howl frequently. They're quite willing to vocalize. They're relatively large, so they're easy to see. And they're social, so they tend to occur in a group, which further improves their observability. If there was any evidence of persistent wolf activity in the state of Colorado, you guys would know it. So, further to drive home this point in natural recolonization, and bear with me, this is a complicated habitat modeling effort that we put forward, but I'm going to walk you through it quickly. So we said, oh, gee whiz, where are gray wolves in the northern Rocky Mountains? What kind of habitat do they occupy? All of those colored circles represent a known wolf pack territory. With this habitat model, red is bad, green is good, and everything in between is intermediate. And for the most part, you can see gray wolves are selecting what we know to be good habitat. And then we extended that model to western Colorado. You can see it outlined in the polygon in the lower right-hand corner of the slide. If I had a pointer, or if I was taller, but y'all can see it. Okay, so you got a lot of green and moderately colored habitat in western Colorado. That would suggest that suitability is good. We're now wondering about connectivity. Could gray wolves naturally recolonize? You see a lot of red habitat in Wyoming between the wolves and the Yellowstone ecosystem and your western half of the state. We then applied this to a model that says, let's look at animal movements in the same way that electricity flows. It's a circuit model. And in this blue image, all those white wisps that you see is where animals would normally want to flow, like electricity. It's just another way to model. You can see that, oh my gosh, this looks to be, and all the light blue that you see on the screen is occupied habitat. So we replaced the little circles with the light blue. That's all occupied habitat in the northern Rockies, drifting into the wisps down into western Colorado. We then said, well, how well does the model do with wolves that we know where they traveled because of a GPS collar? You can see those are the squiggly lines. Animals that had GPS collars went a specific spot in here, here, and here, and we knew it because of the satellite collars. And we said, holy mackerel, the model seems to be doing a pretty good job imagining where gray wolves would choose to go. And you see that the connectivity to Colorado wasn't bad. There's some wisps leading south out of Wyoming into western Colorado. Not bad. And then Wyoming did this. Wyoming said, you know what? Feds are gone. We get to determine what wolves are subjected to in our state. It's now a state-managed species. We're going to decide that across 88% of the state of Wyoming, gray wolves will be considered a predatory species. That says nothing about the animal's ecology. It's a legal term. For a predatory species in Wyoming, there is no management at all. For a predatory species in Wyoming, it means you can be shot, killed in any way, any time of the day or night, any time of the year and in any numbers and left in the field. You don't count. So that blew up the connectivity to the northern Rocky Mountains. Now everything in Wyoming is red. For heaven's sakes, how can gray wolves wander through that gauntlet of social intolerance? It blew up our circuit model. There's no way for gray wolves to get from the southern end of the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem through that already marginal dispersal habitat, now made completely unacceptable because of social intolerance. And if that's not enough, anybody that would say, well, gee whiz, Mike, we should still just wait on gray wolves to show up, here's what happens then. Holy mackerel. This is your United States. The dark color that you see is where the gray wolf remains fully endangered under federal law. All of Colorado, the gray wolf is fully endangered, which means if they show up, there are no management options available to the state, no management options available to any one individual, because the federal law defines prohibited acts for endangered species very, very onerously. It is far easier to coexist with reintroduced gray wolves and their progeny than gray wolves that show up on their own as fully endangered and their progeny. Anybody that says they would support the wolf coming back on its own but stands in opposition to reintroductions does not know what they're talking about, or they are purposely misleading you by not creating an opportunity for the state of Colorado to manage the species. If you reintroduce, you have great opportunity to weaken the provisions of the Endangered Species Act and build out a management scheme that is respectful of the needs and concerns of local citizens. That is not available through natural recolonization. So, all of that says Colorado is highly suitable. The other thing that says it's suitable, we know how to do this because we've done it. And the best way to visualize that is another short video that simply says what we did in Yellowstone could in fact be the future of western Colorado. This video takes about 3 minutes.
The time is now upon Coloradans to decide, do they want wolves to be part of their future?
And you're involved in the restoration of wolves to Yellowstone. Can you explain some of the parallels between a wolf recovery project in Yellowstone and what might happen in western Colorado?
We knew from the outset that if we gave them just a chance, they would take care of the rest. There's just such a rich history. I still think that this is probably, from the beginning of the project, the area that tells the richest story of restoration.
That might be. And the pen's still there.
Yeah. Well, let's go.
It's great every time I come. I mean, the memories just come flooding back.
This was always an aim to get wolves to be released in Yellowstone to restore population to the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, catching the animals in Canada. And the first batch that we got was 14 strong. The second batch we got was 17 strong. There was every satellite truck in the world there to document this historic event of the wolves coming into the park.
Literally, some people felt the world as we know it is going to come to an end if you turn these things loose. We brought the shipping crates up here, and we waited.
That's right.
And finally, we got the word from you. We've gotten approval to let them out of the crates.
Yeah.
Remember we came out and we tracked them?
That's right. Strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack.
Yes.
It worked.
Yeah, this is history. This was a model. So this idea could be exported out to other places. We got a couple tracks here. When we first started here, you didn't have this.
There were no wolf tracks.
The iconic status of Yellowstone 20 years ago, when we got here, was not like it is now.
When I recall, there was no beaver pond in here. How long has this been here?
The first survey I did, that was 1996, and the entire northern range, I got one beaver colony. Now I did the survey last fall, 14, 15. This is brand new. All this willow growth has been in the last 20 years. So this site has transformed itself. Well, wolves impacted elk. So that change in elk, that came through the vegetation community. So not all these stems were browsed down. So not only have beavers increased 14-fold since wolf recovery, songbirds, all on the rise. They were not here 20 years ago. Yellowstone has gotten a breath of fresh air since wolves, the other carnivores too, have come back.
And it really boils down to a simple question to Coloradans. Do you want wolves to be part of the future?
As it turns out, though,
The
suitability of the western half of the state and what we know is not enough to advance restoration. There has to be some agent of change that comes about. At least that's what the Rocky Mountain Wolf Action Fund believes. It's a political organization that aims to put Wolf Restoration Initiative number 107 on the 2020 ballot. No need to read all of this. I find what most intriguing is the first line. Be it enacted by the people of the state of Colorado. Be it enacted by the people of the state of Colorado. It's your state, it's your future to decide. I believe that wolf restoration stands for a lot of things. It certainly stands as an example that we can be different than we've been. We can be better than we've been. We can be uncommon doers. We can be dreamers and visionaries. We can adopt by choice a far more accommodating nature with wild and self-willed nature. And given the significance of the sixth great extinction crisis, such a relationship is long overdue. This past summer, I was blessed to camp on Peel Island with family and friends. Peel Island is a little island, a magical dot of solitude in the southern part of Yellowstone Lake. The first day out, as the setting sun was giving way to a rising moon, I heard the howl of a lone wolf. That's interesting. I believe she was clearly looking for a companion. I don't know the sex, but since it's my story, I'm going to say it was a female. Right? But we know life is difficult for wolves, especially so for any lone wolf. She howled all night long. She was nothing if not determined. There was never a response, so I almost crawled out of my sleeping bag and howled back. I've howled at a lot of wolves in my day, but I know that's frowned upon in the park, and I support the park's policy, so I stayed put. And I listened and reflected, and as I did, I began to wonder if over all these many years, Mother Nature's not been howling to us, hoping for us to finally respond by affirming her importance, hoping for us to finally acknowledge the importance of wild and self-willed nature and rising up in defense of those parts of the natural world that can't defend themselves. As I laid there, as is my habit, because I'm also privileged to serve in elected office, my mind drifted to politics, and I was remembered of the important words uttered by Congressman John Lewis, a great champion of the civil rights movement, a brother for Martin Luther King and others. And when he was fighting for the rights of those among us that couldn't defend themselves, Congressman Lewis simply observed, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? I think this conversation for Colorado is equally long overdue. I don't have any more prepared comments. I will say that there are folks in the room that believe in Initiative 107. They're here if you want to sign the petition. That's between you and them. I'm not here to lobby you one way or the other. But I do appreciate your time. Thank you for spending your evening with me, and I'll do my best to answer any questions. Now, you got to too easy.
Alrighty, y'all. So we're entering into the question and answer portion of the evening. Hopefully, as a group, we have time together for about 2 or 3 questions, but we do have a public reception afterwards for additional questions. So if folks want to line up over here, we'll do questions over here and just Whoever gets here first.
And if y'all don't want to move, I can just hear and then repeat your question, but I don't want to get in the way of the format. But y'all decide.
Go ahead. Okay. So I was just curious, because of the kind of fluctuation of the wolf population, do you think that may have any kind of evolutionary impact on gray wolves specifically and also wolves in general?
Wow. You know, gray wolf populations don't cycle the way some wildlife populations do. Lemmings are notoriously cyclical, for example. We really don't know why. Snowshoe hare are notoriously cyclical. We don't know why. Gray wolves aren't. Gray wolves do really quite well when there's not excessive human-caused mortality and when there's enough food. So I'm not sure what cycles you're referring to, but of course gray wolves are finely tuned to their environment through evolutionary time. That is true. You couldn't be more right on that. Thank you. I don't think I did very well with that. That's, I don't know.
Thank you, sir. Very interesting to listen to you tonight. I heard a little of a talk you had given with the fella recently. So I'm coming from a little bit of a different perspective. And I tried coming here with an open mind, and you shared some valuable information, and I appreciate that. But I'm coming from more of a hunter perspective.
Yes.
A hunter perspective. And so some of what you share, like with the Yellowstone, putting those back into that ecosystem. So it's my understanding that from the 19,000 head of elk that were there, it basically decimated them. So now they're around 4,000. So it really had pretty much a detrimental effect on there. So, and kind of in addition to that, there's that, what do they call it? Trophic cascade. Right.
Yes.
So there's that was very interesting to us, saw the whole video on YouTube about that.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of studies that have come out that pretty much disprove that. And, the whole romantic notion of introducing wolves here in Colorado, I love the wilderness. I love getting out there and, hiking, hunting, camping, fishing, the whole 9 yards. But it seems like we've done pretty well here in Colorado for 75 years without elk or without wolves being introduced. And I just really don't see the benefit other than the romantic notion and the potential to cause some real harm to elk and other wildlife.
Sure.
So
thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for perspective. I can fill in some of the details. Thank you. And your name is?
Brady White.
Brady. Brady's right. The northern range elk herd is much smaller today than it used to be. Imagine Yellowstone National Park as a box, a square box. The northern quarter of that box is known as the northern range. It's different than the rest of the park. Most of Yellowstone is a high elevation plateau. The northern range is more classical montane rangelands, great winter habitat for ungulates, pretty good summer habitat. Brady's right. When we began the work in the mid-'90s, the northern range elk herd numbered about 19,000 strong. It was entirely too large. The state of Montana had put pressure on the state or the Park Service for years to stop mismanaging the elk. You couldn't take a step on the northern range when we began the wolf work without stepping on elk tracks or stepping on elk shit. There were elk everywhere. And with the reintroduction of gray wolves, elk numbers declined. That is true. That is true. But the story is more complicated than just gray wolves. Because what tends to happen is people overemphasize, overstate the predatory consequences induced by gray wolves. So as gray wolves became more common and elk become less common, all the other members of the carnivore guild became more common too. Increase in cougar numbers, increase in grizzly bear numbers. There was a short-term decrease in coyote numbers due to gray wolves, and they bounced back too. And there was no reduction in the hunting pressure instituted by Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. There had been a beautiful late-season hunt that grew out of that northern range elk herd for years because it was so abundant. The state of Montana could have a very liberal late-season hunt. And they kept pushing that elk herd, and it declined. And on top of all of that, we found ourselves in a few years of drought. So I can send you a paper. One of the best papers that looks at the dynamics of the northern range elk herd would actually say most of the decline is caused by drought. The data best fit a drought model. Doesn't mean that wolf predation didn't contribute. It certainly did. But many other factors did as well. But if Brady's right that gray wolves can sometimes cause a trophic cascade, if they can be an ecological engineer, you know how they do that. They do that by killing a bunch of stuff. And they do it by hunting often, so the stuff begins to behave differently. So it is true that if gray wolves are going to be these engineers of trophic cascades to promote willow growth, so as Doug pointed out, an increase in the number of passerine birds, they've got to kill a lot of elk. He made reference to a video. It's worth watching. It's quite nice. Just Google wolves change rivers. It's about 85% right. It overstates. Right? It goes a little too far. Here's what we know. When gray wolves are common enough for a long enough period of time, their predatory behaviors can matter in an ecological sense. Rarely are gray wolves common enough for long enough to have that impact. We tend to see that impact most manifest in areas where they're highly protected. What will be the ecological role of gray wolves in western Colorado? That's up to you guys to decide. You may decide that we want more wolves than not because we want those ecological consequences. If that's the case, then Brady's honey hole may change. You may have to hunt different country. We've seen that with the northern range elk herd. There's no longer a late season hunt outside Gardner, Montana, because the northern range elk herd is about 8,000 strong. It was down around 4 or 5 and it's popped back up. But it's not 19,000 strong. But nobody ever wanted it that big in the first place, except those that had grown accustomed to that very liberal late season hunt. You guys choose what to do with your elk and deer. That's a public resource. Brady would know better than me. Elk and deer are abundant in western Colorado. I would have you believe that the predatory habits of gray wolves are such that there'll be rich opportunities to hunt big game in Colorado, even with a viable population of gray wolves. That's what we see going on in the northern Rocky Mountains year after year after year. But thank you for sharing your thoughts. I won't go anywhere, Brady. We can continue, buddy. Yeah.
Thank you for coming, Mr. Phillips.
Oh, Mike, for heaven's sake.
Mike, I heard my first wolf howl in Canada in 2003.
Ah, good on you.
And like you, I've heard wolves, and I've heard some other wildlife. I spent a lot of time in the woods. I think the wolf howl, the sound that a loon makes, and the bull elk bugle are the 3 coolest sounds you can hear in the woods.
Those are nice sounds. Those are nice sounds.
So I wouldn't mind at all hearing the sound of a wolf howl in Colorado. I'm not opposed to wolves in Colorado. I am opposed to a forced reintroduction.
Sure.
And specifically unmanaged wolves. And a couple quick questions. First of all, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, which is the state agency in charge of managing all of the state's wildlife for all of us in Colorado. The wildlife biologists and wildlife managers with Colorado Parks and Wildlife are strongly opposed to a forced wolf reintroduction. You can read about their opposition on their website. They think it would devastate the population and our $3 billion a year wildlife economy. And hopefully you can, number one, address why you believe that these wildlife biologists and wildlife managers are wrong. And the second concern and question I have is I found this morning a report from Iowa State University that claimed that in 1996, when all of the costs were added up from the reintroduction of wolves in 1995 to Yellowstone, the costs were about $267,000. And what I'd like to find out, everybody knew that the populations would expand and leave the park then the states would be forced to come up with a management plan. Well, when Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho did come up with wildlife management plans, there were no fewer than 9 federal lawsuits to prevent the states from implementing a plan to manage the wildlife in their state. So my concern is if we have devastation to our wildlife population and all these costs to reintroduce wolves and cost to fight federal lawsuits. Who's going to pay for that?
Sure.
And if you don't mind, one final quick
I should have been
follow-up.
keeping notes. I'm getting lost here, but that's okay. I'll do my
Would
best.
you, as a representative of the Turner Endangered Species Fund, would you be able to assure us this evening that the Turner Endangered Species Fund would not enter into a lawsuit against the state of Colorado for implementing a wolf management plan?
Sure. Yeah, the last one's easy. My shop's not litigious. So my shop is a collection of field biologists, trained scientists that help to conceive, design, and implement field projects. So we spend zero time in court, so no, we won't sue. But on the notion of litigation, the tortured delisting of gray wolves in the northern Rocky Mountains was not due to the conservation organization suing the federal government. They did their job. The problem was the United States Fish and Wildlife Service kept telling people what they wanted to hear when they knew it wasn't true. If you want to bitch and moan about the tortured process in the northern Rocky Mountains, that's fair. That falls at the feet of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. They were very good at doing the field work to grow populations, so they were recovered under the federal law. They were lousy at administering the removal of the gray wolf from federal law. That's on the feds, not the conservation NGOs that litigated. They did their job, which was properly interpreting the law and moving forward for redress if they saw a problem. Now, I forgot. Why forced reintroductions? Right? They won't get here otherwise. Colorado will remain wolfless for as long as matters if you don't take the bull by the horns and reintroduce. They will be managed. From day one, they'll be managed. They were in the northern Rocky Mountains managed from day one, so it's just false to say they're not managed. If you read initiative number 107, for heaven's sakes, please read it. I have. It's very good legislation. If it gets on the ballot and you guys vote for it and it passes, it becomes law. So it's fair to look at it right now as a piece of proposed legislation. You can find it on the Secretary of State's website, initiative number 107. It is based on an acknowledgement of the expertise of Colorado Parks and Wildlife. It is based on an acknowledgement of the authority of the Parks and Wildlife Commission and the General Assembly. It is based on the notion that a properly considered restoration plan based on good science and management could result in a viable population of gray wolves occupying western Colorado. It is the height of inclusivity. What can be more inclusive than exercising direct democracy to reach a decision? The first line of 107 reads, "Be it enacted by the people of Colorado." Now, some folks are going to vote no. Some folks are going to vote yes. At the end of the day, you add up the votes. That's as American as mom, apple pie, and baseball. And if you don't think that's inclusive, I don't know what inclusivity is. And I promise you that it will be rested on good management. That is demanded by Initiative 107. I think I touched on the essence of the four corners of your questions. If I didn't, I'm sorry, but thank you. I appreciate your due diligence. Take a look at 107. I think you'll be pleased.
So we have time for just one more question.
I'll go fast.
Okay, just
no,
one.
We have a fellow in the back who was standing there patient.
We have time afterwards too if folks want to come down to the reception for additional stuff. We'll make you available.
So I just want to say, if anybody wants to sign Petition 107, I will be outside the building immediately, and somebody else is here as well. So we are not allowed to do this within the building, but we will be outside. And my question is, would you please speak a little bit about chronic wasting disease?
Oh, yes, thank you.
And what the wolves' impact on that will be.
So, y'all know about chronic wasting disease, right? Better known as CWD. It's a rascal of a disease, always fatal. And it's caused by something that doesn't live, so you can't kill it. It's a misshapen protein, and it's not alive itself. So, and that misshapen protein is very durable in the environment. It has been a problem for Colorado for some time and seems to be growing in scope and severity. So it represents a real threat to the health and vigor of your great game herds. That's just true. Also, it's a tricky disease in that it lies latent for an extended period of time. An animal can be CWD positive and show no clinical signs of disease. So you might go out and kill a nice mule deer buck and bring it home and clean it up and eat it. Well, you may be eating meat from an infected animal. The only way right now to know for sure is to subject appropriate tissue samples for testing. Right now, it's not known to have crossed the human barrier, but it's very similar to other diseases that cause humans great problems. And there's recent studies with macaques, a type of monkey that is a very important proxy for human medical research, and they were able to infect macaques by eating meat from a CWD positive animal. So there is some concern that it becomes a human health issue too. Okay, so hold that thought. Imagine that you are a predator. You're a coursing predator. You know what a coursing predator is? A coursing predator is a predator that fundamentally runs things down. A cougar would be best considered an ambush predator. Gray wolves, oh my Lord, they're coursing predators. They run things down. Because of that, they're very good at picking up on signs of predisposition to predation. As I said earlier, and it's simply true, most attempts by gray wolves to hunt fail. So they're very good at finding some small advantage. An advantage because the animal's very young, or the animal's very old, or the animal's got arthritic hips, or the animal's got bad teeth. It's amazing how bad teeth can cause animals the blues, but bad teeth matter. Imagine that you have a disease that is slowly wasting your life away. In other words, you have chronic wasting disease. Gray wolves, almost certainly common sense would indicate, will be a good governor on the spread of CWD because they're looking for animals that are predisposed to predation. Now here's where the plot thickens. Recent studies show that the prions, those misshapen proteins, persist in coyote turds. If a coyote eats a CWD positive deer, those misshapen proteins can be passed in the coyote's fecal material. So they're still put back in the environment and able to be ingested and promote the disease. The scat may be washed into a creek, and then the misshapen proteins float down the creek, and a deer gets a drink from the creek, and all of a sudden the deer's got those prions. Okay, so there's no certain stop to the disease by wolf predation, but at least we can imagine it's an effective arresting of the disease. Fewer deer are going to be contracted because a wolf turd is washed into a stream that they didn't drink water out of than being near a live deer that's eating and defecating, urinating right next to you and able to transmit the disease right to you. Common sense would dictate that coursing predators have the capacity to serve as a governor on the spread of CWD. For that reason alone, I would expect that most big game hunters would celebrate the opportunity to hunt with a kindred spirit that also has this cleansing effect on game herds. That's the CWD story. Thank you for the question. Thanks, folks. I think we're done. Yeah? Yay. Yay. Oh, I get one of those. Wow. It's like the key to the city.
Yeah, so we have a small memento to present to Mike to thank him for being with us tonight.
Yes.
And if you'll put this with all of your other
Thank you.
members.
Yes, I will.
So don't forget to, there's a reception downstairs in the Spirit Gallery. Mike will be there, and all of you are welcome. And please mark your calendars for April 17th for the Physics Nobel Laureate, Kip Thorne. And here's an intriguing little note. He will be talking about black holes and mole holes. Good. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, hey, thank you. Thank you. This is great. Oh, this is great.
Yeah.
We don't have a skyline like that in